Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be exploring, you often hear this question in the gay rights debate, what did Martin Luther King Jr. actually think about homosexuality? And we're diving deep into a book
Okay.
that is dedicated to this very question and some other insights.
Right.
Not to settle present-day arguments,
Right.
but to understand the nuances of King's views.
Yeah, it's a journey back in time, to see how his personal beliefs, how they kind of intersect with the social and religious landscape of his era. We'll see how those beliefs played out in his choices as a leader.
And get this, the contrast starts right within King's own family.
Oh, wow.
So his wife, Coretta Scott King, became a powerful voice for gay rights. She even spoke at Human Rights Campaign Fund events alongside a gay couple who were close friends and colleagues.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So his daughter, Bernice King, had a very different stance. She actually marched against same-sex marriage alongside a conservative pastor who's really well known for his very strong anti-gay views.
Wow.
Quite a family dynamic, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
But we're here to focus on MLK Jr. himself.
Yeah, and to do that, we need to kind of rewind all the way back to 1958.
Okay.
There's a young man's question to King in Ebony magazine. And it's the only written statement we have from King directly addressing homosexuality.
Okay.
The question was about struggling with feelings for other men, and King's advice was to seek psychiatric help. And I'm curious about this advice. Can you unpack that a little bit more for me?
Absolutely. So it might seem a little outdated now, but for 1958, that advice was actually quite progressive. Think about it. At the time, the American Psychiatric Association still classified homosexuality as a mental disorder.
Oh, wow.
And King's response, while grounded in that medical understanding of the time, it didn't call for a cure. He even acknowledged that that homosexual feelings were actually very common, which is fascinating, considering the research of Alfred Kinsey was making waves by revealing how prevalent those feelings really were.
So even this one statement from King is more complex than it seems at first glance.
Yeah.
But we need to understand the historical context even better.
Yes.
To really get it right.
Absolutely. Imagine the climate back then. You have the government actively persecuting gay people during the Lavender Scare.
Right.
This was a time when the government purged gay people from their ranks. They were worried that gay people were susceptible to blackmail or were just inherently subversive. And you also had influential psychoanalysts like Edmund Bergler, who is very popular, really promoting the idea that homosexuality was a sign of maladjustment.
Wow.
All of this created a climate where King's advice to seek psychiatric help wasn't actually out of line with the thinking of a lot of liberals at the time.
Yeah. It really makes you appreciate how much our understanding of sexual orientation has evolved since then. But it also makes you wonder how someone like King, deeply religious as he was, how did he navigate these societal views with his faith?
Yeah, that's crucial to understanding the whole picture. Remember, King himself said, "I am fundamentally a clergyman." His 1958 response, by focusing on psychiatry rather than biblical condemnation, it actually aligned with a rising trend among Christian liberals at the time. It's a shift, that challenges the whole notion that opposition to homosexuality has always been like a core tenet of Christianity.
So you're talking about the work of D. Sherwin Bailey. Right?
Exactly.
His work, really shook things up.
He was groundbreaking, His book, Homosexuality in the Western Christian Tradition, challenged centuries of interpretation. He separated homosexuality from homosexual acts, arguing that the biblical texts, when interpreted literally, were condemning the acts, not a person's inherent orientation.
So even though King didn't explicitly endorse Bailey's more radical views, his approach in that 1958 advice column does seem to fit within this shift in liberal Christian thinking.
Yeah.
And this wasn't happening in a vacuum. It makes you wonder how this new way of thinking about homosexuality was playing out within the church.
You're right. And to see that evolution, we need to look at what was happening within liberal Christianity at the time. You had conferences like the 1961 North American Conference on Church and Family.
Okay.
And at this conference, they actually invited Evelyn Hooker.
Wow.
And her research, was demonstrating that there was no inherent psychological difference between homosexuals and heterosexuals. They even recommended that churches embrace scientific data and advocate for positive legislation for gay people.
Wow. That's a huge step away from the prevailing views of the time. It really highlights how the conversation was shifting.
Exactly. This wasn't just some fringe idea. This conversation was happening right in the heart of the church. Now, imagine all of this is happening alongside the civil rights movement. And this is where the story of Bayard Rustin becomes really crucial.
Oh, yes, Rustin.
Yeah.
A brilliant strategist, openly gay, and deeply involved in the civil rights movement.
Yeah. He was absolutely crucial to King's rise to prominence. They worked very closely, but there's a layer of complexity here. King sometimes distanced himself from Rustin because of pressure from others about Rustin's sexuality.
It's so interesting how King, a champion of equality, seems to have been influenced by the prejudices of his time. I mean, you would think that his commitment to equality would apply universally.
Yeah. And there's evidence of this throughout their relationship. For example, King accepted Rustin's resignation in 1960 to appease homophobia within the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Yeah.
And even after Rustin's crucial role in organizing the 1963 March on Washington, King didn't offer him a formal position.
It's tough to reconcile that. It definitely paints a complicated picture of King. It's almost as if he was capable of great allyship,
Yeah.
but also influenced by the prejudices of his time.
And there's even evidence that King himself sometimes engaged in banter about gay people. It suggests maybe a possible internal conflict within him on this issue.
So while King is fighting this incredible battle for racial equality, the gay rights movement itself is gaining momentum. You have the Mattachine Society, they're organizing pickets, and they even do a sit-in that's modeled after the civil rights sit-ins.
Wow.
And media coverage of gay rights is increasing. But through all of this, King remains publicly silent on the issue. And this is where it gets really interesting for me. We know from Coretta that King did express concern about discrimination against gays to her privately, but publicly he never spoke out in support of the movement. Why? He was so deeply committed to fighting injustice, inequality. It doesn't add up.
That silence is one of the most difficult parts of his legacy to reconcile. Why didn't he publicly support this movement that, at its core, was aligned with his own fight for justice and equality?
Yeah, it's a question that really makes you think, what was holding King back from openly supporting the gay rights movement? And the book doesn't really give us a definitive answer,
Right.
but it does explore some possible explanations.
So one possibility is that King just felt that, adding another layer of complexity to the fight for racial equality would just be too much. Remember, the civil rights movement was already facing intense opposition, and there were a lot of internal disagreements even within the movement itself.
But wouldn't speaking out against all forms of discrimination have been more consistent with his message of, universal love? I mean, wouldn't that have actually broadened his base, appealing to those who felt, marginalized and excluded?
That's a valid point. But, we also have to consider kind of the strategic realities of the time. King was walking a tightrope. He was building coalitions. He was trying to appeal to moderates. And alienating potential allies could have been really detrimental to the movement as a whole.
So you're saying maybe he felt like the movement wasn't ready to take on gay rights as well?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And then there's another uncomfortable possibility we have to consider. Remember those instances of banter that we mentioned earlier? Could it be that his own internalized homophobia, however subtle, played a role?
That's a tough one to wrestle with. To think that someone who fought so passionately for equality might have harbored those kinds of prejudices himself.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even the most heroic figures are products of their time. We can't erase those complexities or pretend that they didn't exist. It's about understanding the full picture.
Yeah, I get that. It's frustrating not having clear answers. But this whole deep dive is about facing those complexities, right?
Yeah.
Grappling with those nuances. And it's about understanding that even someone so dedicated to justice and equality never publicly championed gay rights. It makes you wonder, are there other aspects of his life where those inconsistencies might appear?
It certainly raises the question of, how we interpret and apply the legacies of these historical figures to present-day issues. It's easy to put them on a pedestal and ignore their flaws, but that doesn't really honor their humanity, does it?
No, it's like trying to fit them into this neat little box when history and people are rarely that simple. But speaking of legacy, it is worth noting that despite King's silence, many activists, including Coretta Scott King, firmly believe that he would have supported the gay rights movement had he lived.
Yeah, and there's a strong argument to be made there. If you look at the core principles that drove King, his belief in the inherent dignity and worth of all people, his commitment to fighting all forms of oppression, his, unwavering faith in love's power to overcome hate, it's hard to imagine him not supporting the rights of LGBTQ plus individuals.
You're right. It's hard to picture him looking at the discrimination and hate directed at the LGBTQ plus community and saying, like, that's not my fight. It seems so inconsistent with everything he stood for.
And while we can't definitively say what King would have believed, we can look at his life, his evolving views on other social issues, and his commitment to justice to support the idea that he might have ultimately embraced the movement. It's about, considering those possibilities, not just erasing the complexities.
Yeah. It's giving me a new perspective on how we approach history. It's not about trying to find like easy answers or shoehorning figures into our present day categories. It's about engaging with them as they were, flaws and all.
Exactly. And in King's case, that means acknowledging both his achievements and his shortcomings. The ways in which he challenged the status quo and the ways in which he might have fallen short. It's a more honest and ultimately more enriching way to learn from the past.
It also takes the pressure off needing him to be perfect, to be impactful, right?
Right.
His message of love and justice, it still resonates so powerfully today, even if his personal journey was complicated.
Absolutely. And I think that's a key takeaway for you from this deep dive. History is a process, not a destination. People's views can change, and we should be open to that evolution, even when it comes to iconic figures like Martin Luther King Jr.
It's all more reason to really, delve into these complexities instead of just resorting to, easy answers or reducing him to just a soundbite in today's debates.
Precisely. By understanding the context, those nuances, the evolving landscapes of both the civil rights and gay rights movements, we can have a much richer and more informed discussion about King's legacy and what it means for us today.
I feel like this deep dive has been peeling back layers of history to reveal a more complete picture. But I have to wonder, knowing all we know now about King's complexities, where do you think he would stand on the issues facing the LGBTQ plus community today? Would he be on the front lines advocating for equality?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? It's a question that sparks a lot of debate,
Right.
and there are strong opinions on both sides. Some people point to his silence during his lifetime as proof that he wouldn't have embraced the cause. Others say his commitment to justice and love would have undeniably led him to support LGBTQ plus rights.
I can see that.
Yeah.
It is hard to imagine, someone who fought so passionately against racial segregation not also seeing the parallels with other forms of discrimination.
Yeah.
Think about the arguments that were used against interracial marriage back then. They're eerily similar to some of the arguments that are used against same-sex marriage today.
You're absolutely right. And King was actually crystal clear in his belief that individuals should have the freedom to marry whoever they choose, regardless of race.
Right.
He saw it as a fundamental human right. He even invoked Thomas Jefferson's ideals.
Wow.
Saying, when any society says that I cannot marry a certain person, that society has cut off a segment of my freedom. It really makes you wonder how he might have applied that same logic to same-sex marriage.
Yeah, it's a really powerful point. And when you consider his focus on love as a transformative force, the belief in the inherent dignity of all people, it does become harder to picture him not evolving on this issue.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that the gay rights movement itself was really in its early stages during King's lifetime.
Right.
The Stonewall Uprising, which was a major turning point, happened a year after his assassination.
Wow.
So it's impossible to know how he would have responded to the more radical and visible movement that, really emerged later.
Right. It's almost like we're asking King to be a prophet, to have foreseen the future of the LGBTQ plus rights movement. But maybe that's not the point, right? Maybe the real value of exploring this question is how it prompts us to apply the principles he championed to the challenges of our own time.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something really important there. We can't expect these historical figures to have all the answers, but we can learn from their struggles, their courage, and their just unwavering commitment to creating a more just and loving world.
Right.
In King's case, that means asking ourselves what it would look like to really embrace his vision of the beloved community in a way that includes everyone,
Right.
regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity.
It's a powerful challenge for sure.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to put words in King's mouth, we can use his legacy as a jumping-off point
Yeah.
for our own reflection and actions, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean to fight for justice and equality in the 21st century?
Yeah.
How do we build bridges of understanding and empathy across differences? How do we live out the principles of love and nonviolence in our own lives and communities?
Those are the questions I think King would want us to be grappling with.
Yeah.
It's up to each of us to, find our own answers, to keep pushing for a world where everyone can live freely and authentically.
Right.
A world worthy of the dream that he so eloquently articulated.
Well, this deep dive has certainly taken us on a journey. We've explored the complexities of King's views on homosexuality, the historical context that shaped those views, and the enduring power of his message of love and justice.
Yeah.
It's definitely left me with a lot to think about. And I hope it's done the same for you.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr.